Welcome to this video. In this video, I'm focusing on the general psychology and life skills module, chapter 1, which is the essence of psychology. This is part 1 of the series, and I'm going to do another part 2 under the same chapter. That is chapter 1, titled Essence of Psychology. The objective of this lesson includes going to define the term psychology and related concepts as they are illustrated in this module. The goals of psychology, there are about 4, and I'm going to explain each one of them. And then I'm going to explain the historical background and the major perspectives in psychology, that is the early schools of psychology and the modern schools of psychology. And lastly, I'm going to explain and dwell on the branches or subfields of psychology. I'm not going to discuss the research methods in psychology, as I will discuss those in part 2 of this series. The definition of psychology and related concepts. The word psychology is derived from two Greek words, psyche and logos. Psyche refers to the mind, soul, or spirit, while logos simply means study, knowledge, or discourse. Over the years, psychologists have defined the term differently based on their intentions, research findings, and background experiences. Nowadays, though, most of us agree on the following definition. That is, psychology is defined as the scientific study of human behavior and the underlying mental processes. When you break this definition, you can break it into 3. Science essentially means the scientific processes in behavior, that is covert or overt or covert behavior. Overt is what can be observed, and covert means what may be hidden and may not be observed by sight. Mental processes, these are internal covert activities of our minds, such as our thinking, feelings, and remembering, etc. The goals of psychology, these are 4. Basically, there's description, explanation, prediction, and control. I will go further and explain each of these goals in greater detail. The first goal, which is description. Description in this involves observing their behavior and noticing everything about it. It is a search for answers for questions such as what is happening, where does it happen, to whom does it happen, and under what circumstances does it seem to happen. The example that is given in our module is, for example, a teacher might notice that a young freshman girl in his or her general psychology classroom is behaving oddly. She is not turning in her homework, and her results are slipping badly, and she seems to have to be very negative towards the course in general. So the psychologist under such circumstances may want to know what may be happening and what may be causing these odd behaviors. And under this goal, one is to try to explain what is happening, how does it happening, and where does it happening, and under what circumstances does this behavior occur. So in other words, the psychologist will try to find and describe what may be prevailing under such conditions. The second goal of psychology is explanation. And under this goal, one will be trying to find out the reasons for the observed behavior. And This is important as it assists us in the formation of theories that explain various behaviors. And by now, I think we are aware of the various theories that are used in psychology. And a theory basically is a general explanation for a set of observations or facts. In the example that we gave earlier of the girl who is behaving oddly in the classroom, the researcher may want to understand why such is happening, and as a way of explaining these behaviors, would would go further and ask parents or guardians about the particular girl. And in so doing, one would want to find issues that relate to home background, friends, siblings, and all other explanations that may be there to find out why she would be behaving in such a manner. And in this world, one would then go further to explain why the girl is behaving such oddly. So basically, the explanation is a goal on psychology trying to explain why things are happening the way they are happening. Prediction is the third goal of psychology. And under this goal, one will be trying to determine what will happen in the future. And in the case of the freshman girl that we've been doing so far, the psychologist or counselor would predict, based on previous research into similar circumstances, that this girl may never be able to fully reach her academic potential. So prediction aims to look into the future and try to find out what may happen based on research and facts. Final goal of psychology is control, and this goal basically aims at how can it be changed and control or modify or change the behavior from this undesirable to desirable. And in the example that we have been following so far, certain learning strategies can be used to help the girl so that she will be successful in her academic endeavors. And control can be used in the sense that psychologists usually try to check out the effects of certain undesirable factors in examining the relationship between one or two or more behaviors. For example, in our example, we'll try to find studying the relationship between intelligence and academic performance in freshman courses. As psychologists may need to control the effects of socio-economic status of the family. So this goal usually aims at trying to control undesirable effects or undesirable consequences of certain behaviors and try to minimize and control them so that we can achieve what we would aim to achieve, and controlling all the external variables that may hinder effectiveness, and try to control all the issues that may be prevailing in such circumstances. So these are the four goals of psychology. Under this section, we are going to look at the historical background and major perspectives in psychology. And from our module, you will notice that there are several early schools of thought. And psychology, as you are well aware, began as a science in 1879 when William Wundt, the structuralist, established a laboratory at the University of Leipzig. Wundt developed a technique called introspection, which was used to scientifically examine mental experiences or mental processes. And once psychology began to use the scientific methods, it then went on successive different schools of thought, which emerged at different times and were led by different individuals. So under this section, we're going to look at the 5 major schools of thought under psychology. So the major school of thought was structuralism, and this school views psychology as the study of the structure of the mind. You have to understand that when looking at structuralism, the most important aspect is that it talks about the structure of the mind. This is a key aspect. Whenever you talk about structuralism, you have to note this important aspect. And it was expanded by Titchener, who was a student of William Wundt. And the goal of the structuralist was to find out the units or elements which make up the mind, that is, sensations, images, and feelings. These are the 3 elements that they were mainly focused on, and they used the introspection, which we define as looking inward into our own consciousness. It is a procedure that was aimed at analyzing mental experiences into 3 basic elements, that is, the images, feelings, and sensations. So these were the important aspects in structuralism, which was propounded by William Wundt and expanded by his student Edward Titchener. So the second school of thought was functionalism, and unlike the structuralist who looked at the structure of the mind, the functionalists viewed psychology as the study of the function of the mind. The founder of this school of thought was William James, who was the first American psychologist and the author of the first psychology textbook. So you have to know that William James, when we talk about the development of psychology, he is a key founder in that he was the first American psychologist and also the author of the first psychology textbook. Unlike Wundt and Titchener, James focused on how the mind allows people to function in the real world. And it's focused on how people work, play, adapt to their surroundings, a viewpoint which he called functionalism. That is how you function within the environment. He developed many research methods other than introspection, including the use of questionnaires, mental tests, objective descriptions of behavior. In general, according to the functionalist, psychological processes are meant to be adaptive. That is, they are important and they are meant to be adaptive within the human functions as the human functions within their environment. So this was an important school of thought, and it was the second after structuralism. School of thought was Gestalt psychology, and this viewed psychology as the study of the whole mind. Max Wertheimer was a German, and his colleagues founded this school of thought in Germany in the 20th century. Gestalt psychologists argue that the mind is not made up of combinations of elements, unlike the structuralists. And the German word for Gestalt refers to form, or and configuration or pattern. According to them, the mind should be thought of as a result of the whole pattern of sensory activity and the relationships and organizations within these patterns. In brief, Gestalt psychologists acknowledge consciousness and they hold that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, meaning that the mind is greater than its parts, that is, the images, sensations, and feelings. And these, if you remember from our earlier discussions, these were the 3 elements that were focused by the structuralist psychologists, that is William Wundt and Titchener. But the Gestalt psychologists view that you have to expand more besides images, sensations, and feelings. Behaviorism was another important school of thought in psychology, and behaviorists viewed psychology as the study of observational and measurable behaviors. Watson was the founder of behaviorism. Other proponents under this school of thought include Thorndike, Skinner, and Watson. For Watson, psychology was the study of observable and measurable behavior, and nothing more about hidden mental processes. So they concentrated more on what was observable and nothing about hidden mental processes. That is, nothing about thoughts and feelings. And according to Watson, we cannot define consciousness any better than we can define the soul. We cannot locate it, measure it. If you cannot locate it and measure it, then it cannot be the object of scientific inquiry. So they were mainly concentrated on what can be observed and what can be measured. The next school of thought in psychology is psychoanalysis. And psychoanalysis was founded by Sigmund Freud, and he's the most controversial and the most popular in the study of behavior and mental processes. He started as a physician and became convinced that some of the physical illnesses of his patients didn't have medical or bodily causes, but non-physical or emotional causes. He called these kinds of illnesses hysteria or conversion reaction to indicate the conversion of emotional problems into bodily problems. He also underscored that conflicts and emotional traumas that had occurred in earlier childhood periods can be too threatening to be remembered consciously, and therefore they became hidden and unconscious, and then they later manifest as behaviors within one's own experience. So psychoanalysis, for you to understand it, you have to look at Sigmund Freud and his thoughts, which he expanded. That is, you have to look at the unconscious experiences of individuals, and that the early first 5 years of life are important in explaining all the behaviors that occur later in one's life. So, when rounding up the historical background and the major perspectives in psychology, we have to ask you, how do you think about the five early schools of psychology, and how do they differ from each other? And these, as we have illustrated earlier, the major five schools of psychology are structuralism, functionalism, gestalt, behaviorism, and psychoanalysis. And all these schools of thought differ in terms of three basic issues. That is the object of study, the goal, and the methods of inquiry that is used under each school of thought. And when we talk about the object of study, we are looking at what they studied. Is it unconscious mind, or observable or behavior? And in their goal, we have to analyze the components of the mind or observing the effects of the environment on the behavior. And under the method of inquiry, you have to ask yourself, what is the method of inquiry? And if you remember what we have talked about, when you look at structuralism, we're talking about introspection. And when we looked at functionalism, we talked about introspection as well as other methods of study that were used mainly by Watson when he looked at the use of questionnaires, case studies. And when we look at psychoanalysis, we're looking at clinical case studies, and we're also looking at other methods of inquiry that were used under this school of thought. So basically, you have to be able to define each school of thought, the main characteristics of each school of thought, the objects of study, the goals of each school of thought, and the methods that were used by each school of thought. And these methods differ from one school of thought to the other. And you have to be able to explain all these issues in greater detail. Under this section, we are looking at the different branches of psychology or the subfields of psychology. And therefore, there are so many branches of psychology, and we are going to look at developmental psychology. This is basically it studies the physical, cognitive, and psychological changes across the lifespan, and it attempts to examine the major developmental milestones that occur at different stages of development. So, developmental psychology is all about explaining the different changes that occur as one develops. That is, when one is an infant, an adolescent, and during adulthood. So this is the study of psychology that explains all the changes that occurs physically, cognitive, and other aspects within human beings. So this is developmental psychology. And personality psychology, it focuses on the relatively enduring traits and characteristics of individuals. Personality psychologists study topics such as self-concept, aggression, and moral development. So basically, personality psychologists looks and study issues that have to do with different traits of individuals. What makes an individual, how one individual differs from the other in terms of their personality, issues that have to do with self-concept, aggression, moral development, and other related issues within this subfield of psychology. And social psychology, it deals with people's interactions, relationships, and social perceptions and attitudes. So the topics that social psychologists usually deal are issues that have to do with how individuals interact within social groups and how individuals' attitudes, relationships, and issues that have to do with aggressiveness, social learning, and how people learn within the social aspects in different issues as individuals interact as individuals, groups, and within groups. So these are some of the branches of psychology. We shall go further and look at other branches as well. The other subfields of psychology are cross-cultural psychology, and it examines the role of culture in understanding behavior, thought, and emotion. It compares the nature of psychological processes in different cultures, with special interest in whether or not psychological phenomena are universal or culture specific. So this is a branch of psychology that looks at issues that occur within different cultures and how these issues differ from one culture to the other, and also to note where they are similar and how similar. So this is a subfield of psychology that looks at these important aspects of psychology. And industrial psychology, in this, it applies psychological principles in the industries and organizations. And the main aim of this aspect is to increase organizational productivity and the efficiency within organizations. It also looks at the interactions between workers within different aspects of industry. And forensic psychology, it applies psychological principles to improve the legal system, and it looks at the police testimony, that is eyewitness testimony, and also the aspect that have to look with the police lineups, how psychology can be used to improve the identification of offenders, and as well as how psychological principles can be used to improve the legal system. That is when witnesses are interrogated, and how memory issues that have to do with memory, how people forget events, and how people can be assisted in remembering issues that might have occurred within different aspects. The aim being to improve the legal system. Another important subfield of psychology is educational psychology, and this is concerned with the application of psychological principles and theories in improving the educational processes, including curriculum, teaching, and administration of academic programs. So, educational psychology is important. It also looks at how children can be taught and how we can improve the teaching of students within educational settings. And it also looks at how we can motivate students and how we can manage classroom behaviors within different aspects of the educational field, and how we can improve marks, and how we can also help different students within different schools, that is students with learning disabilities and students with different challenges, students with issues that you have to do like with hard of hearing, and those that cannot hear properly, how they can be assisted within educational settings. And it also looks at how we can also improve the curriculum and how we can assist educators, that is the teachers, in the delivery of different materials, and how this can be improved to assist students learn better and improve academically. In the health psychology, it applies psychological principles to the prevention and treatment of physical illnesses and disease. So, health psychology, these are they mainly deal with issues that have to do with illnesses and the prevention of illnesses, how we can prevent and how we can improve. Issues that come to mind are how medical personnel can be assisted to improve how individuals take their pills, that is the issues of compliance, and how we can explain different behaviors that occur within the health fraternity. Another important subfield of psychology is clinical psychology, and this is a field that applies psychological principles to the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of psychological disorders. So, clinical psychologists deal with different aspects of psychological disorders within the clinical field, and they also assist in diagnosing, treatment, as well as assisting as consultants to help improve different aspects of psychological repertoires. And we have counseling psychology. This is a field having the same concern as clinical psychology, but they help individuals with less severe problems than those treated by clinical psychologists. So, counselors usually deal with issues that have to do with issues like counseling of students, marriage counseling, pastoral counseling, and also issues that have to do with how to improve human behaviors within the different subfields of psychology. So, in summary, in this video, I have focused on the definition of psychology and related concepts. I've also touched on the goals of psychology, and I've touched on the historical background and major perspectives in psychology. And I've also touched on the early schools of psychology as well as the modern schools of psychology. And finally, I've touched on the branches of psychology. As I have alluded earlier, I will not I have not discussed the research methods in psychology, as I will discuss this in a subsequent video. Thank you for viewing this video, and I would like to urge you to continue supporting this channel. And if you have not yet subscribed, I would urge you to subscribe to this channel. Feel free to share, link, and give others who may want to share this video. And as always, I thank you all for taking your time to view my videos and our videos. Thank you so much.